She told me, "Stop acting attached. We're not actually together," in front of everyone, then laughed while grabbing her boss's arm seconds later. The entire room fell silent when they learned who I was, the man who once rescued their company, and she had just shamed me. Someone looking you dead in the eyes, in front of your colleagues, and cutting you down with a single, casual sentence. Not a joke, not a slip of the tongue, but a scalpel slid between your ribs. That's exactly what happened to me. Don't be clingy. People might think we're actually a couple. She proclaimed it, loud enough for the laughter to ripple around us, for the pain to settle in my chest like a piece of shrapnel. She smiled at the manager of the catering team, then just kept walking, as if I were hired help who'd overstepped. No introduction, no name, not even a glance back. I stood there for a moment, still holding her weekender bag like some damn bellhop. There was a pause, a catch in my breath, then a small, practiced exhale. I gently set her bag down on the gravel path. Then, without a word, I turned and walked in the opposite direction, past the bonfire, along the stone path bordered by those excessively sculpted boxwood hedges, toward the lake. It was a sprawling estate, over 40 acres of manicured real estate. Old money taste, new money lighting. I knew this place. I'd seen it before, too many times. In fact, this property used to belong to a subsidiary. They kept it quiet after the restructuring, but I recognized the curve of the hedge, the slope of the back lawn from aerial shots during due diligence. Everything they thought was theirs was built on handshakes and signatures I once granted, without ever asking for credit. I liked it that way. Legacy didn't need a nameplate. But disrespect. Disrespect has a scent, and it was following her like an overly expensive perfume. I found an oak tree near the water's edge and just stood there, watching her socialize near the champagne station. That fake, effortless grace. That laugh she used when she wanted attention without commitment. She was in her element. Young, magnetic, dangerous to anyone stupid enough to think she valued people the same way she valued impressions. Then I saw him. Her boss. Tanned face, impeccable posture, that post-private equity glow of someone who hadn't been told no in 5 years. He stepped out onto the balcony above me, a drink in one hand, his phone in the other. He scanned the lawn like a lion looking for a waiter, and then his eyes fell on me. He froze, his shoulders tensed. The phone slowly lowered to his side. His mouth half opened as if to say something, but no sound came out. I nodded once. Nothing dramatic, just a polite acknowledgement, like a ghost tipping his hat to a man who remembered where the bodies were buried. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just turned quickly and went back inside. I didn't move. I didn't have to. I walked to the other side of the estate, leaning against the fence near the helipad. The breeze was cool, a reminder that even in opulence, nature has its own rhythm. That's the thing about these retreats. They think it's about team building. It's about power hierarchies. And the moment her boss laid eyes on me, something cracked in theirs. An oak leaf rustled on the gravel behind me. Voices went from laughter to murmurs inside. Whatever was coming next, I didn't need to say a word. Inside the main pavilion, she floated as if she owned the oxygen. A glass of Prosecco in one hand, her wrist elegantly resting on the arm of a senior manager. She was posing for a smile, as if she were in a photo shoot no one else was invited to. She had the kind of charm that walked the thin line between strategic and sociopathic. She knew when to laugh, when to tilt her head, when to brush an elbow just enough to blur a boundary. It had always worked for her, at least until now. She was completely unaware that 30 feet away, behind a smoked glass door in the lounge, the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. "I'm sorry," her boss said to one of the oldest board members, pulling him out of a casual chat about venture capital. "That man by the tree. Do you know who he is?" The board member, Michael, gray suit, perpetually unimpressed, squinted through the window. "What man?" "That one, over there, leaning on the railing." He was with her. Michael's eyes narrowed. He took out his phone. A few taps, a pause, a breath, then a look at another man sitting by the fireplace. The other man leaned forward, looked at the screen, then at me. His face paled so quickly, you'd think someone had cut off his blood flow. "Are you sure it's him?" he asked. The boss didn't answer. He was too busy looking at me again, like someone who just realized they parked their yacht in a shark breeding ground. The problem wasn't that I was there. The problem was how I was there. Invisible, unannounced, unrecognized, not part of their planning presentations or guest lists. Just present, silent, watching. "Is not on the partner list," another board member whispered, joining the huddle that was now forming near the coat check. "He hasn't been in the press since. God, 14. Try never," someone else added. "He vanished after the Inside Tech acquisition, left mid-deal, turned down the equity, said he had enough." "Yeah," another said, a tremor in his voice. And 2 weeks later, the FTC greenlit the merger without a single antitrust investigation. Who do you think facilitated that? Outside, I shifted my position slightly. Nothing dramatic, just enough for the wind to move through my jacket. A worn barber she once mocked for looking too cheap. I liked it. It didn't scream anything, and the pockets had history. She brought him here, the boss muttered under his breath. And she presented him like that. He didn't even say the words, but everyone knew what he meant. As if I were nothing. The idea wasn't only offensive, it was terrifying. Because if I was who they now suspected I was, and she had the audacity to treat me like her weekend plaything, then she was either tremendously arrogant or dangerously ignorant. Neither trait was exactly boardroom material. And yet, there she was, laughing by the charcuterie board, taking selfies with a marketing director, not turning once to see the growing spiral of whispers coiling like smoke behind the library doors. It was like watching someone drink wine in a burning room, completely unaware that the walls were already starting to melt. Her assistant passed by, offering a printed agenda for the upcoming Saturday morning strategy session. She rolled her eyes, barely looking at it. I'm not doing that presentation unless James helps with the numbers, she said, referring to a junior VP who adored her. I'm here to network, not to babysit spreadsheets. Someone behind the curtain heard that too. Someone who had already started reviewing archived emails, past deal memos, the cross-referenced initials, the patterns that matched pseudonyms on off-the-books advisory contributions. The name whispered before, it wasn't a name that appeared on LinkedIn. It was the name attached to a foundation that quietly funneled seed capital to half a dozen companies, including the one whose estate they were currently on. And she was still working the room like a TED Talk in heels, radiant, effortless, unaware. But her name had just started to slide into the board's mental compliance ledger under the heading of failure in due diligence. And once that column starts to fill, no amount of charm can erase it. During the 2008 crisis, while most were clawing their way out of leveraged debt and praying the banks wouldn't tighten the noose, I was sitting across from 3 failing logistics companies, each of them bleeding cash, leadership, and direction. I didn't offer them a lifeline. I offered them structure, silence, anonymity, and one condition: no press, no credit, and no noise. The kind of deal where my name remained, buried 6 levels deep in internal documentation, pseudonyms, shell companies, third-party signatories. I wasn't interested in deals in the spotlight. I was interested in the leverage I could wait for. The first company, Alva Freight, was a mess, tangled in regional contracts and idiotic warehousing strategies. I cleaned house, reorganized their routes, and folded them into an anonymous holding group. Years later, that same group quietly bought this estate as part of an executive hospitality expansion. She had bragged about the retreat destination as if it were a luxury secret. I already had the blueprints in an old file folder. The second company, Dominion Transit, her boss's current employer. He had once proposed a failed pivot to last-mile services before I corrected his vertical focus and brought in 2 board members with direct ties to federal infrastructure advisors. He never saw my hand, but I made sure his corner office had reinforced walls. Because without me, there would have been no office. The third, my crown jewel, controls one of the most quietly aggressive licensing portfolios on the planet. A single patented scanning algorithm we secured in 2011 now filters through 3 global customs networks, 5 pharmaceutical channels, and 80% of maritime import records. That one I keep especially close. It's why the right people feel it when they see me, and the wrong ones don't even know they lost. She never asked. She never wondered why I knew too much about internal politics or shadow advisory tactics. She never noticed when I redirected her naive proposal to the board to avoid a tripwire clause in a compliance protocol. She thought I was just observant, just curious. She once joked that I gave off low-profile billionaire vibes. I laughed it off, but the people inside that house, they knew, or rather, they remembered. Michael, the board member who had seen me from the window earlier, was now quietly reviewing a scanned printout. Not on a phone, on paper, secure, offline. That was passed in a folder to one of the partners who used to run finance at Alva. He didn't say much, just looked at the name, the real one, the one that doesn't appear in company press releases, and then at the walls of the estate. I thought he had retired, someone said quietly. Michael didn't answer, but his eyes shifted to the woman by the wine bar, now gently arguing with the event planner about the seating arrangement for Sunday brunch. She brought him here, he muttered. She dismissed him here, another corrected. And that was the point. It wasn't just that I had been important. It was that I still am in ways that don't depend on LinkedIn titles or magazine covers. Influence isn't noise. It's infrastructure. And when you are the conduit, you don't need to shout. She spent months trying to get their attention. Revised presentations, rehearsed speeches, a personal brand polished with all the flavor of a startup MBA boot camp. I had seen it all. Hell, I had funded better things. And every time she mentioned wanting to connect more deeply with the board, I gave her space. I watched her try to turn charm into influence. I watched her pretend fluency in a language she didn't even know had grammar. Meanwhile, in the very room she stood in, The lighting system was installed during the estate renovation I approved. The furniture contracts, one of my more discreet secondary companies, would reclaim from decommissioned rail lines I helped save in 2010. Every corner of this place hummed with reminders of decisions I made. She just couldn't hear it yet, because arrogance is loud. But legacy doesn't need to raise its voice. They say ego blinds you before it drowns you. And she was still dancing on the shore, completely unaware that the tide had turned. She was laughing with one of the creative directors near the Prosecco station, nibbling on a foie gras crostini, as if to seal her next promotion with a wink and a timely anecdote about handling difficult personalities. Her stilettos didn't sink into the grass. Her posture screamed practiced elegance. She didn't even look over her shoulder, not once, until he touched her elbow. It wasn't aggressive, but it was fame enough to make her blink mid-sentence. The CEO's face wasn't angry. It was worse. Tense, pale, tight, with a kind of internal pressure she didn't yet recognize. "Walk with me," he said. She followed, confused, her nervous smile beginning to waver at the edges. Maybe she thought he was going to praise her presentation prep, or suggest some last-minute insight she could use in the strategy meeting. Her shoulders were still back, her hips swaying just enough to appear confident. Then, near the catering tent, he stopped walking. He didn't even turn to her at first, just exhaled. And finally, "Do you realize who you just embarrassed in front of the board?" The words landed like a slap, not because of the tone, but because of the coldness. It was clinical, with no room for misinterpretation. She blinked. "I'm sorry." He pointed through the tent opening, past the bar staff, towards the railing where I stood, drinking water like someone who needed absolutely nothing from anyone there. "That man," the CEO said, his voice low but sharp. "He is the reason our third-quarter crisis never hit the papers. He was the one who structured the advisory exit from the Abrasis audit. He made 2 phone calls that reconfigured half our internal system without alerting compliance. And you just introduced him as an unimportant +1 and then you mocked him." Her mouth fell slightly open. "He never said." "He didn't have to," the CEO interrupted, finally turning to look her in the eyes. "We said it for him years ago. Every time we signed something clean. Every time we didn't end up on the cover of Fortune for all the wrong reasons." She swallowed hard. "He told me he was just a consultant," she whispered. The CEO's laugh was sharp, humorless. "He is, which should scare you even more, because that means he's not obligated to tell you anything. And yet, he walked in here with you. You brought him, and what? You treated him like an intern carrying your sunscreen." She opened her mouth, closed it again, because she had no script for this. All her little tricks, the social manipulation, the performative charm, the slight passive jab she used to undermine a man's confidence before positioning herself as the competent one. It all crumbled before a single glaring revelation. She had no earthly idea who the hell I really was. "He never told me about the Abrasis audit," she said quietly, trying to salvage something, either the board or whatever. "I didn't even know that he—" "Then maybe that's the problem," the CEO said. "You didn't ask." There was a moment of silence. The wind moved through the tent flaps. You could hear the clinking of ice in a cocktail shaker 50 feet away. And then he said it, the sentence that sealed the gravity of it all. "You didn't just insult a guest," he said. "You insulted the man whose silent nod is the reason you have a job. And now every single person in that boardroom is wondering if you are too arrogant or too stupid to be trusted with influence." Her eyes flicked towards me. I didn't move. I didn't look at her. It wasn't necessary. Legacy doesn't defend itself in public. It just waits for the truth to resonate louder than the lie. She took a step back, then another, as if distance could somehow reverse the impact. But the air between us was no longer space. It was a crater, a silent record of the opportunity she had just set on fire in front of the most powerful people she had ever been in the same room with. And it was just beginning to burn. That evening, the sun set behind the tree line as if trying to hide from the tension that hung over the estate. The string lights flickered on. The music began to float from the patio speakers. Light jazz, the kind chosen by someone who thought ambience meant ignoring the growing crisis. I was in no hurry. I stood by the indoor fireplace, nursing a glass of Ardbeg, and listening. Not to people. People weren't talking, but I watched how they moved. Who stopped laughing? Who kept glancing at the library doors as if expecting an earthquake? Then the invitation came, a discreet nod from Michael, followed by a quick word to the event. "Manager." The sentence was simple but heavy. "Is ready." I was led down a short hallway, past a painting of a battleship I once helped keep from being auctioned off during a hostile takeover. It's funny how these places collect artifacts without ever learning the stories behind them. The boardroom was warm, paneled in walnut, dim light, the scent of old money in the air. Half the board was already there. The other half filed in behind me, shaking hands with that practiced, cautious grace reserved for those who know the hierarchy but aren't sure where I sit in it. Michael stood first. "It's been years, sir," he said, without a trace of irony in his voice. I shook his hand. No smiles, just recognition. One of the newer board members, a woman who took a seat from a hedge fund that swallowed 3 divisions last year, tilted her head. Would you reconsider an advisory role? She asked. We're restructuring our intermodal approach. Your insight would be. I held up a hand gently. I'm just here for the weekend. The room nodded. Not a single objection. They knew exactly what that meant. Outside the boardroom, she was circling, pacing, trying to regain ground. She approached the COO by the appetizer table with a glass of red wine in one hand, like a prop she didn't know what to do with. Look, she began, there's a misunderstanding. He and I are casually seeing each other. It's not like I knew. He never said. The COO cut her off, folding his napkin with meticulous patience. Then he looked at her with an expression that should have been framed and hung in every MBA course titled, How to Know You've Lost. Then you made 2 grave errors, he said. You insulted him, and you didn't know him. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. He continued, we vet everyone. Advisors, vendors, even the caterers. And you brought in a man who could walk into any of our partners' boardrooms and clear the room. And it didn't occur to you to ask who he really was. She tried to laugh, to deflect. Okay, but that's not fair. He doesn't go around showing his credentials. He didn't even tell me his last name for weeks. That's not his job, the COO said flatly. It was yours to find out who you were dragging into our inner circle. By the time I walked back through the lounge an hour later, the music had shifted to something more somber. Less saxophone, more strings. Half the board had vanished, retired to late-night calls or private briefings. She was standing by the garden doors, clutching her drink like a life raft. Her eyes followed me, then darted away the moment I looked in her direction. That was her first smart move all weekend. Someone walked past her, someone she had been courting for months. He didn't stop. He didn't nod. He just walked past. That's when she knew she wasn't in the room anymore. Not in any way that mattered. The conversations that would define the next year of this company's future weren't happening over cocktails. They were happening behind glass doors she no longer had the key to. And for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely alone. Not the curated loneliness of, I'm just independent she liked to brand herself with. The real kind. The one that comes after you realize every ladder you climbed was built by someone you never bothered to thank. And one by one, the rungs were disappearing. The next morning dawned like any other on an estate as manicured as this one. Fresh linens, expensive eggs, and the smell of coffee strong enough to pretend no one was hungover. But under the veneer of another productive retreat day lurked the scent of something else, a reorganization. The official schedule was posted in the main hall. Strategy panels, executive brunch, a branding session at noon. She was scheduled for 9:30 a.m., a prime time slot right after the CEO's vision remarks. She had bragged about it 2 nights ago. She called it a sign of growing trust. Only the room didn't feel like a place of trust anymore. At 8 a.m., I was sitting on the patio with a cappuccino when one of the board members approached cautiously, almost as if he didn't want to admit he needed help. We have a problem, he said, sliding a thin binder across the table. The Walker Freight acquisition is stalled. China's regulators are circling, with burning goodwill, and the internal modeling is garbage. I glanced at 3 pages, then pointed to a single line. This, I said, invert it. You're front-loading the market assumptions instead of letting the performance trend dictate the positioning. Flip it. Lead with data, not ambition. He didn't even sit down, just nodded, grabbed the file, and left as if carrying a live grenade someone had finally shown him how to defuse. By 8:45, 2 more board members found reasons to casually walk past the patio. One dropped a name, another dropped a file. At 9:10, the CEO himself came out. He shook my hand again. He didn't say much, but he didn't have to. That's the luxury of legacy. Silence is a language. Inside, she was preparing, alone. Her boss, deliberately absent. She asked her assistant if he would be joining her. The response, he's been called into a separate briefing. That meeting didn't exist. They just didn't want him standing next to her when she went down. When she walked into the room for her session, there were fewer smiles than usual, less eye contact, less of that polite energy executives used to flatter before watching someone fail. She stood behind the podium, her laptop open, her nails drumming against the case as she waited for the projector to connect. The lights dimmed. Slide 1, market share metrics. Slide 2, forecasting model. Slide 3, risk disclosure. And then, before she could even explain the heat map, Michael stood up. We'll review this later, he said flatly, without even looking at her. We have other priorities this morning. She froze. You could hear her laptop's fan spinning. That small, desperate were of a machine trying not to overheat. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Michael, then at another board member. No one held her gaze. She stepped away from the podium slowly, as if maybe if she moved smoothly enough, she could exit the moment without anyone noticing. But they noticed. They all noticed. She was supposed to be the rising star, the new face, the vision with teeth, as some glossy article had once called her. Now she looked like an intern presenting her senior project to a room of men and women who had already found someone else to trust. She went back to her seat, but her chair wasn't where she'd left it. It had been moved slightly off-center, a physical metaphor so small, so unintentional, that no one else would notice. But she noticed. Her hand trembled slightly as she tried to adjust it, and for the first time, the word optics escaped her mouth, not as strategy, but as fear. Outside the glass, I hadn't moved. I was still drinking coffee, not part of any formal agenda. But inside, the structure was shifting, not with announcements, not with memos, with momentum, and every ounce of it was moving away from her. She locked the door behind her and tore off her jacket as if it was suffocating her. Her suite still smelled of lavender oil and fabric softener. Small, lovely amenities she had requested before the retreat. Nothing in the room now matched her pulse. The welcome basket, perfectly arranged, sat on the vanity, untouched. A bottle of red wine and 2 glasses, still wrapped in tissue paper, meant for the post-presentation victory toast she had confidently planned. She kicked her heels across the carpet and paced in tight, frantic circles, her breath ragged, her fingers twitching nervously over her phone screen. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't even registered what Michael said in the boardroom. Her mind had locked itself down the second he stood up and cut her off like a failed proposal at a bad startup demo. All the work, the positioning, the strategy evaporated in under a minute. The shame was no longer abstract. It was physical. Her skin hummed with it. She opened her contacts and scrolled. Her father's name appeared like a life raft she hadn't needed in years. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello, Pumpkin. Are you okay?" "Dad," she whispered. "Do you know someone named?" She paused, struggling even to say it. "Gregory Vale." The silence that followed wasn't surprise. It was devastation. A slow exhale filled the line. "Honey," he finally said, his voice heavy, almost broken. "You just insulted the man who saved our company in '09. Her mouth went dry. "The what?" "Gregory Vale isn't a man. He's a system, a shadow, a force." He turned the lights back on when we were 2 quarters from total collapse. He stepped in without taking credit, took a backroom seat, reorganized the debt, restructured the executive compensation package, and got us out clean on a handshake. We offered him a board seat. He refused. Said, quote, "You already have your uncle. He'll do just fine." Her legs buckled. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed. "He doesn't do press," her father continued. "He doesn't do photos. Hell, half the people who know his name have never even seen him in person. But people owe him. Everyone owes him. I've seen senators defer to him in private conversations. The banks listen when he whispers. And you dismissed him like he was a valet." She closed her eyes, her hand covering her mouth. Her father wasn't yelling. That made it worse. He was speaking with the kind of reverence she had never heard in his voice. Not for any man, not even for her grandfather. "I thought he was just a..." She stopped. "He never told me who he was. And why would he?" Her father retorted coolly. "He never does. Because real influence doesn't need affirmation. It lets people show who they are. And you just showed him." Her eyes were burning now. The room suddenly felt too bright. Her brain replayed every conversation, every moment I talked over me, corrected me in meetings, made passive-aggressive comments in front of others as if I was someone trying to ride her coattails. God, she even remembered mocking the worn jacket I wore to dinner once. She called it shabby, as if it were a flaw. The man she thought was quietly accompanying her, orbiting her world. He built it. She gripped the edge of the bed, her knuckles white, and tried to steady her breathing. Her father said something else on the line, but she was no longer listening. Her ears were ringing with the final nail in the coffin. "You didn't just ruin a relationship," he said, almost as an afterthought. "You may have just destroyed your reputation." She dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. For a long moment, she didn't move. She didn't speak. She just sat there with her knees to her chest, surrounded by a luxury she no longer felt welcome in. Everything she thought she knew, wrong. Everything she thought she controlled, gone. And the man who could have saved her from all of it was already halfway out the door. By Sunday afternoon, the air had shifted. The retreat, once brimming with carefully engineered positivity and curated networking magic, had turned cold. Not overtly. On the surface, the charade still held. Smiles were exchanged. Hands were shaken. A jazz quartet played something upbeat near the dock. But underneath it all, the energy had curdled. There was a perimeter around her now, unspoken, silent, but firm. People still greeted her, but no one invited her into the next room. Conversations cut off just as she approached. Her name, once sprinkled in every strategic discussion, had gone silent. Then the message came, a firm knock on her suite door. One of the assistants, posture stiff, eyes fixed on a point just over her shoulder, handed her a sealed envelope. Your stay has been extended by 1 night, the assistant said. There's a feedback session scheduled for 6:30 in room 14. She blinked. No one mentioned. The board added it this morning, the assistant replied before leaving quickly. Inside the envelope was a printed agenda. It was short, a single page, 10 bullet points. Point 7 took her breath away. Advisor session. Gregory Vale. The letters looked like they had been carved in stone. There was no context, no explanation, just a man she could no longer look at without feeling sick. She dressed in silence. A navy blouse, no jewelry, low heels, the kind of outfit she used to wear when she knew she was speaking in front of key people. Only this time, no one had asked her to speak. By the time she arrived, the hallway outside room 14 was mostly empty. The windows were dark with the reflection of the string lights swaying from the canopy outside. She sat in one of the high-back chairs opposite the door, her legs crossed, holding the printed agenda as if it might offer her protection. At 6:31, the door opened. The CEO stepped out, not smiling, not asking how she was. He just handed her a second sheet of paper, a shorter one. Before we begin, he said flatly, read this. It outlines the concerns raised over the weekend. She scanned it quickly. Bullet points, ambiguity, terms like error in judgment, misrepresentation, reputational risk. Her throat tightened. She looked up. No one told me this was happening. He met her eyes finally and said, that's exactly the problem. Then he turned and went back into the room, leaving the door slightly ajar, just enough for her to hear mumbled voices, but not enough to be part of the conversation. She was frozen for a moment, unsure whether to go in or wait. Then the door closed, soft, decisive. She sat back down, clutching the paper. She didn't know if it was worse to be left out, or to know that inside, my name was on the agenda. I walked past her 10 minutes later. Not fast, not slow, just direct. I didn't look at her. I didn't stop. I didn't offer any gesture that might suggest familiarity, because there was none anymore. We were no longer in us. In fact, we probably never were. She turned her head to follow me, as if just by catching my eye, just by explaining, she could reverse this. But I didn't stop. I didn't say a word. And when the door closed behind me, that sound, the soft, cushioned click, was louder than anything she had heard all weekend. She sat outside for 30 more minutes. No one came to get her. No one offered an explanation. And when the door finally opened again, it wasn't for her. It was for someone else entirely. Another advisor. The board had quietly flown him in that morning. They weren't including her. They were replacing her. And not with a bang, but with a nod, a signature, a silent changing of chairs. Her name hadn't been taken off the schedule. It had simply stopped meaning. 2 weeks later, the retreat was a distant blur of shame and unanswered questions. She hadn't talked about it with anyone, not in detail. She returned home pretending nothing had happened, slipping back into her curated routine. Matcha in the morning, inbox 0 before 10 a.m. Recycled affirmations tacked neatly to her refrigerator. But the silence didn't leave. It hung over her desk, her phone, her mirror. She kept checking the Slack channels that had gone quiet. She saw the meeting she once led get reassigned without notice. She tried to convince herself it was just a post-retreat moment, that someone would be in touch any day. Then the mail came. A thick, certified envelope hand-delivered by courier. No handwritten note, no accompanying call. Just the letterhead of the firm she once treated as her personal playground. Effective immediately, your strategic oversight privileges are suspended pending further review. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a warning. It was a freeze. The kind of freeze that signals the board isn't just uncomfortable. They are done pretending you belong. She stayed at it for a full minute before opening the second letter. It was shorter, colder. This one was from her boss. We trusted your judgment, but your lack of due diligence reflects poorly on this firm. Until further notice, you are relieved of all client-facing responsibilities. No signature, just his name typed out in Helvetica. Brutally professional. She read both letters 3 times. Once to understand, twice to accept. On the 4th read, her hands were shaking. Because it was real now. Not a cold shoulder, not a boardroom snub, not an awkward silence at a weekend brunch. This was professional exile in black and white. She didn't cry. Not at first. She paced. She opened her laptop and typed a message to her assistant asking if there had been a mistake. But, halfway through, she stopped. She deleted the draft. What could she say? She hadn't just misread the room. She had misread the entire architecture of power. And I wasn't answering her texts. She checked her messages. 9 unread. None to me. That's when she picked up the phone, scrolled to my name, hit call. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same thing. The 3rd time, her voice broke on the first syllable of my name. She cleared her throat and spoke quickly, as if rushing through the shame could somehow make it easier to forget. It wasn't my intention. I didn't know. If I had known. Her voice cut off. and for the first time in a long time, she sounded human, pleading. I thought you were just. I don't know what I thought. A pause, then softer. I'm sorry, KCK. She didn't know I listened to the message twice, but I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, not even because I wanted to hurt her, but because some mistakes don't need retribution. They just need to be seen, and she had finally seen it. Every name she tried to impress, every door she thought she had walked through on charm alone, had all come through me. My silence, my access, my presence. And now she was outside of it all, staring at closed doors that once opened effortlessly. Because access, once revoked, is not always restored, especially when the person holding the key never says a word. The ballroom was packed. High ceilings, gilded molding, corporate banners with elegant serif fonts. The annual summit was always a spectacle. A place where CEOs pretended to care about panels and ESG compliance while quietly sniffing out mergers and exits. I hadn't appeared publicly at one in over a decade. My name had slipped into legend, becoming more of a whisper than a resume. But this year, I was quietly invited. No announcement, no red carpet. Just a reserved seat on the left side of the stage, next to three people who once sat in my office begging for bridge capital. They couldn't spell documentation correctly. The lights dimmed after the final speech. A moderator introduced the new initiative, a $400 million strategic fund targeting infrastructure efficiency and supply chain resilience across North America. The crowd murmured with interest. When the slide changed, my name appeared. No photo, no bio, just 4 words: Legacy Strategic Advisor, JVI. The crowd didn't applaud, but the right people sat up straighter in their seats. They knew, backstage, there was a closed-door meeting with 7 board members and 2 government liaisons. I said very little, mostly I nodded. I clarified a clause. I suggested a change to the fund's milestone structure. It was enough. That night, I left through the side exit. I didn't stay for the gala. It wasn't necessary. The press photos circulated in the morning. There I was, in the corner of the stage, my arms crossed, listening to the final speaker. And in the background, blurred near the edge of the frame, was her, standing, not speaking, not invited on stage, wearing a jacket that tried to look powerful over a posture that had forgotten how to be. She wasn't featured in the release. She wasn't quoted in any summaries. No one mentioned her name. She was just present the way wallpaper is. That night, the text came. Short, late, typed like a confession with no punctuation. Why didn't you warn me? I looked at it for a moment. There was no anger in me, no pride, just a dull, quiet truth that had been waiting to be said from the beginning. I replied, you warned yourself. You just didn't listen. And then I turned off the phone. Not for cruelty, for peace. There was nothing left to explain. No planned revenge, no executed plot. Her downfall had been her own design, built slowly and carelessly on ego and her perceived position. All I did was stand still long enough for the truth to do what it always does. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have set her straight the moment she insulted you? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your take.